Afternoon, everyone. We'll give it another minute before we get started. Welcome. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like we have reached a good number of folks to join us. Thank you again for joining us. Good afternoon. So we hope that you are enjoying a lunch now and are keeping safe and are healthy. Since it is still Hispanic Heritage Month, happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Thank you for joining the second in a webinar series during our lunchtime. Buen provecho, and we hope you both enjoy a lunch, a good lunch, healthy lunch, and also the nourishing and refreshing that we hope you'll get from this short webinar with you. Let's dig in now and talk about what's coming. So this webinar, just so that you know, it is produced by the Career Ladders Project, funded by the Chancellor's Office. So thank you, Chancellor's Office, for all the good support and helping us do this type of work. Please engage with us as you go along and listening to the webinar. We want you to be as engaged as you can be on chat with posting comments and questions, and you'll get a little bit more information about that. In the chat, you'll also be getting some resources that we thought might be useful and helpful to you as the conversation proceeds and as follow-up as well. So you might want to download those as we move along as well. The resources and recordings will be available, as was mentioned already, and we hope that you avail yourself of all the resources that you'll get today. Really quickly, the CLP team that helped produce this webinar series is here. Lupe Danos, consultant and longtime counselor at DVC, retired now, but still doing some wonderful work. Valeria Torres, program coordinator, and also Christina Sandoval. We all work together to bring to you an exciting and fruitful conversation, and let's get to it so that we can hear from our wonderful panel. Before we move into the actual webinar, we wanted to do a poll and find out who's in the audience. So if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and answering the poll, and you'll see the poll on your screen results as they come. So we're hoping for an audience that is primarily counseling, student services, those that support students. And as you can see from the poll results, it turns out that it looks like that's really what's the folks that are coming and participating here. Thank you for your participation, and it's always nice to know that we're providing support to you that fits the role and the need that you have. So thank you for that. I don't know how much more we can expect. There's 86% participation, which is not bad to get that kind of response. So we can go ahead and move forward to the next slide, I think. So this is information about the series itself. And we also are wanting this to be a continuing of supporting colleges and in particular practitioners and staff in this unprecedented time of change, challenge, and disruption. It continues to be a concern for all of us, I know, especially with trying to come back in some manner, in some form. So we're looking for trying to develop these sessions that are equity minded, equity and action orientated for practitioners and scholars to continue elevating their understanding of the deeper issues of counseling and student support services, not just with an equity lens, but an equity action and practice. These roundtable sessions are covering a variety of topics, as you could see here in the website webinar snapshot, and you could see the titles that we're covering, as well as the purpose there as well. So we wanted these series to really cover how to facilitate or share information of observable changes that are happening, or people that they're thinking about changes that they want to make in counseling and student support service delivery, that really shows being responsive to students as they're trying to get to their goal or on their pathway. Secondly, to engage in student-centered exchange and learning with the focus on strategies that improve retention, completion, and so forth. Lastly, building on the lessons and the innovations from the experiences that were, especially as of late, because of the pandemic and the other challenging situations that we're going through, what are some of those lessons and the innovations that can be shared, so that we can focus on the policy and practice changes that need to be made by instructors, faculty, administrators, and so forth. So the topic of today's webinar is social justice, learning communities, and we thought, inviting learning communities that have been longstanding doing this work, and because of guided pathways and other reform efforts, it seemed an appropriate time to highlight this lens of social justice through these learning communities. And it's our pleasure to bring our speakers to you that will, we believe, really kind of touch on all of these issues. So these are the goals for the session today: to share approaches for supporting students' social, emotional, and academic needs through the counseling and in-class instruction through an equity lens; identify social justice strategies that are exercised in these learning communities and in environments that could be widely used in general student populations across a campus. And then lastly, to foster learning and exchange among the practitioners and staff that are coming together here. Thank you. So we will be asking you to put your questions in the chat, and we're going to be collecting those questions. If you list out the speaker's name, we'll be sure to put them in order so that the speaker can quickly scan and look at what questions they would like to try to answer first. We'll make as much time as we can towards the end of the session to address your questions. And so we hope that you will engage with us. As you think of questions, please feel free to put them into the chat itself. So our wonderful speakers that we've been able to have join us today are Byron Reeves. He's EOPS counselor and also Emoji Support staff at Santa Rosa Junior College. Dr. Nguyen Paul Orante, Vice President for Student Services at Skyline College. And also Cynthia Cordova, Puente counselor, and also, I should say, former Puente student. So she's a Puentista that's gone through the process, and co-coordinator at Palomar College. Thank you all for joining us here today. I know that in the conversation that we had, one of you said, I found my people, I found my home. And this was such a great way I thought, to maybe start as we're introducing you all. And I believe, Byron, you're going to be up first to talk about a certain aspect of what you want to share with the group. So each speaker will be speaking for just a few minutes. We'll do one round of questions, and then we'll move to the next speaker. So Byron, please take it away.
Hey, y'all. Hey, family. I say family because we're all here. So that means we're doing this work together. So thanks for joining us. And I hope you all can hear me okay. I am going to talk about, okay, yeah, I do see a thumbs up. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about how and what some of the strategies are to scale up of what we're doing with the Emoji learning community here at the JC, and just other cool things that we're doing at the JC in regards to social justice and equity, and in particular, how we support Black students and how that can be scaled up here at the JC and maybe at your college as well. I do want to start and preface my comments by saying that we aren't doing enough to be having this webinar this deep into what's happening in the world, to continue to look at the rates and success of Black students, we aren't doing enough. I don't want this conversation in our strategies to act as if we are doing enough to support Black students and all students in that matter. Institutions have to do more, practitioners have to do more. And I'm happy that I'm in this space with practitioners that are looking to do more. I hold myself accountable along with our team that we continuously have to do more to support our students if we're really, really trying to move this equity needle, right? And move our institutions to being anti-racist institutions, right? And you know, since the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we've seen a lot of institutions across the nation and in our state and our community move to action. And you know, it's very sad that it took that to happen, but I am encouraged that we're here and we're engaging in this work as practitioners. And so I'm just going to share 3 different pieces of what we're doing within Emoji, within EOPS here at the JC. And then, you know, if you have questions, feel free to dive in and ask some more questions. But I'm sharing just tidbits of what we've been doing. The first thing I want to talk about is the scale up of the student success team. I'm putting in the chat, there was a write-up of what we're doing in the student success team model from the Petaluma campus, and we scaled that up to the Santa Rosa campus. And so you can read more about what the student success team is, but we have a peer-to-peer model here, and that's how we model our student success team. I led that program on the Petaluma campus about 3 to 4 years ago. And what we were realizing is that students want to talk to other students. Students seek value and really confidence from hearing about how other students were successful navigating our complicated systems. And so the student success team has been something that, with the peer-to-peer lens, has been something that's worked for our campus, and especially for Black students on our campus. We try to find and employ Black students to be what we call student success coaches, so that they can help the new students coming in be more successful, right? And again, the details of the student success team stuff is in that document. I'll be happy to share more. And I've since moved on from that program, but I refer students back to that program all the time. And I'm so happy that we've scaled it up at the Santa Rosa campus because it has a huge effect. Of course, it hits the persistence and the student success rates and the retention. But I think even more so, we're starting to find that when students make those connections on campus, they're actually more successful. They build in community. And I see some relationships with students that, you know, started in a student success peer coaching program and moved to, we're going to college together, we're transferring together. So it's been a huge success with the student success team program. And I also want to talk about what we've been doing with our early alert within Emoji. And so one of our brilliant English instructors, Dr. Michael Hell, he was on the cutting edge of trying to understand how we can support students early and often. And my work with the Starfish program and the retention program, even though we didn't sign on, we learned some valuable lessons to how we should be looking at early alert and what we do to support students early and beyond. And one of the big lessons that we learned was that a lot of the early alert work we were doing was reactive. We were reacting to a student not doing well in class. We were reacting to a student failing the test or not showing up, right? And that wasn't working for us. We were chasing students. We were, sometimes it was too late for a student in that particular semester. And so we wanted to really think about how we can be proactive in our early alert and what that really looks like for our students in Emoji programming. And so Dr. Michael Hell really pioneered this awesome program, which is early alert, but we're now, instead of asking instructors to say, did the student miss a test or did they miss a class? We're now asking students basically almost every week, but probably almost every 2 weeks about what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And we start that off with a welcome survey. And that survey asks students, not the normal questions that, do you feel prepared for the semester, but we're asking students how they feel from a 1 to 10 about their writing skills, how they feel about their reading skills, And we've connected each intervention or each response to an intervention, I should say, right? So if a student answers 5 and below on a reading skill, then we're reaching out to that student with a specific intervention that ties directly to what the student is experiencing, what they're saying is are barriers to them being successful. We also ask them about their basic needs or what don't they have to be successful in the semester. And so Dr. Michael Hell has really, really created a system into which we're finding out and identifying barriers before they even happen, right? And we're able to connect to students early and then connect them to program services that can really be of thought for them, right? And of success for them. And so one of the examples is if a student wants to meet with the peer coach, if they think they would benefit from a peer coach, then they indicate it on that survey, and then we connect them to a peer coach. And for the most part, a lot of it's automated, right? And so if a student is saying they don't feel confident in their writing or whatever have you, that's linked to Dr. Michael Hell because he's the English teacher, or the writing center, right? And that email goes to our contacts in those different services and programs. And now we're directly connecting the students to and meeting them right where they're at. And I think as we think about guided pathways and we think about how to really support students, having a robust early alert program, identifying the barriers before we get there, before the student actually hits that barrier, I think we will start to move. If we can institutionalize it and scale it up, we will start to move in a place where instructors know their students, right? You're sitting in class and you know what your student's going through. You know the ability of the student, right? So it's kind of stepping back and saying that the instructor knows all and that all students should be where the instructor's at, but it's kind of saying, here's where my students are at individually, and then also attending to their particular barrier, right? And then working through that barrier. Sometimes we hear from students that, we ask students how they're feeling from a 1 to 10, and we watch that trend. And then so if that goes from 10 to 5 in 2 weeks, then that is a message to our team to really, really do our best to follow up with that student, right? So our Emoji Support staff, myself, our other counselors, we're reaching out to that student because we've seen the student say they started off, week 2 with, I'm 10, I'm feeling really good about the semester. I'm feeling really good about my classroom work. Now, week 5, they're not feeling so good, right? And you'll be surprised how honest students are on these surveys. And so definitely shout out to Dr. Michael Hell for that. And definitely shout out to our team for following up and connecting those interventions to what students are really experiencing in the front line. And then lastly, I want to talk about what we've been doing to try to scale up the Emoji practices. If you don't know, Emoji has a lot of practices, and Michael's name out loud. Sorry, I see a comment. Sorry about that. But what we're seeing is that we want to scale up our amazing practices that we do within Emoji. And so to do that, we've been applying and being granted the opportunities to hold community of practices on our campus, right? And so now we're moving to what we call an Emoji supported model. And a lot of other colleges around the state are doing it. For us, it is very, very new, I would say, right? But our campus was kicked into action, and a lot of our faculty said, we want to support Black students, we want to do better. And so what we did this summer is we held 2 communities of practice. One was about being Emoji supported, right? What that looks like, what that entails, the details of that. And then secondly, Dr. George Salou at our campus, along with myself, we held a community of practice called Creating Black Equity, where we asked faculty to look at their CORs, look at their curriculum, look at their pedagogy, and to really focus it and ask themselves hard questions. Is this centering Blackness at all? Is it excluding Blackness, right? How can we start to really think about what's happening in the classroom as it relates to our African-American students? And so we're actually having a part 2 of that community of practice actually Friday. And so it's going to be very, very important for our faculty and our staff here at SRJC to start to understand that we haven't been doing the work. And now this is the start of doing that work, using Emoji practices, using the tools of the college that we have available to us, right? And actually getting in and really, really doing the grit work to produce outcomes for our Black students. And so I want to stop there because I think I'm past my time, but definitely happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Byron. This is wonderful. I know it's very challenging to pack all this wonderful work, but of course, you know, knowing your campus, as I've had the honor and pleasure of working with a number of members that you mentioned, and Dr. Holcomb, I see him on the webinar as well. There's so many opportunities to connect the dots, and so just real quickly, what would you say has been the success of trying to tie or connect the Emoji practices? As you were saying, you're trying to scale those up with, let's say, the guided pathways expansion and trying to implement that more broadly speaking?
Yeah, I think the success is that for the first time on our campus, our learning communities are talking to each other in the way to scale up the practices, right? What are y'all doing well in Puente, in APAS, in Emoji, and tying those all together and bringing that to the front of what we're doing, right? And of the COPs, of the course curriculums, of the pedagogy.
Thank you, Byron. Appreciate it. We're going to come back and have you join with the others when we get our Q&A towards the end. Thank you again. Let's move on to our next speaker, Cynthia. I believe you should be able to unmute and show video. Want to thank you again for making time to join us. And please, you have a specific area that you wanted to focus on. Please begin.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Cynthia Cordova, and I'm a Puente counselor and co-coordinator as well as assistant professor at Palomar College. So I'm really happy to be here, and I was really excited just to be able to talk about Puente because if you know me, I love Puente. And so what I really want to talk about is how my experience with Puente has changed my practice. And so just a brief overview about Puente. The Puente Project is an organization that has been in California for almost 40 years, and we're in over 60 community colleges. And really the program is a cohort model where we incorporate culturally relevant and responsive pedagogies. And we have a team of 2 faculty coordinators, so a counseling faculty and an English faculty that are the main people that coordinate the program and do lots of different events for the students. And really the goals of Puente are to help students transfer to universities and graduate with their bachelor's degrees. But the most important goal, I think, is this one, which is to have them come back one day to be leaders and serve as mentors to their communities. And so I think what's really special about Puente is just that framework about seeing the whole student. And I'll give you an example of this. And I'm sure that many of you can probably resonate with similar experiences if you're a student of color or first gen or just you're new to college. And so when I was in the community college, you know, I showed up, I'm like, I'm gonna help people, I'm gonna save the world, and it's gonna be amazing. And so of course I majored in psychology. And you know, I quickly saw that there weren't people that looked like me. And that was very disheartening. It was intimidating. I wasn't sure what that meant about me or people that look like me. And then, of course, I also had the luck to meet a Puente counselor when I first started. And he told me about Puente, and I didn't really understand what it was, but I was like, sure, if this means you're going to help me, then great. And so I joined. And what Puente does is that it helps students create that sense of belonging that a lot of us lack. Right, when we get to a college and a space where it doesn't really seem like that's where we're supposed to be for whatever reason. But Puente really changed that for me, and it changed the trajectory really of the rest of my education and career in education. And really it's because Puente creates a space to center the Latino Chicano perspective. Right, so how cool is it to show up to your class and then get to learn about Chicano culture and being able to tie in different issues and concepts that you have never heard about before. And usually in public school education, right, we usually hear one narrative and it makes us feel unseen. And so what Puente does is to make sure that students are seen and heard, and not giving them voices, but really elevating the voices that they already have. And it's just a very powerful experience to be a part of that. And the way that I feel it changed, well, I don't know if it even really changed my practice, but I think it really shaped it just being a Puente student myself. And it's very close to my heart, is again, like really being able to see the whole student as a person first. And that's really important because I think oftentimes we worry about the circumstances of students and what they need academically, but we know that they're people first, right? So whatever they have going on in their communities, their families, and their personal lives is going to spill into their academics. And if we don't help take care of that by at least acknowledging where they're coming from, then we're just going to be really addressing a symptom of a problem rather than what are the root causes that are happening. And these aren't new things for us. These are systemic issues that are happening, and they're just coming to light for some of us in the last couple of years. But they're very real realities that our students live on a daily basis. And so I think that, the practice with Puente is really to have students realize that they have valuable experience, they have their families and their communities that they bring with them into the college experience. And being a student is really only one of their identities, right? They can also be a parent, they're a daughter, a sibling, they're the head of the household. They have so many other identities too. And if we don't acknowledge those, then we miss out on a lot of opportunities to be able to engage with our students and really get to know them and really meet them where they're at. And you can't do that unless you recognize those different identities. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned throughout my experience in Puente was that, I think a lot of us as counselors, we go in it because of people and relationships, and we want to help make everything better, right? And I think that there's this acculturation process that happens when you enter academia and higher education in general about the way things that should be. But really, those are ways that can be colonized, and they're systemic practices that are handed down to us for generations. And you can see that in the way that classes are taught, for example, right? We learn to do it in a certain way, we're taught a certain way, and so we enact in those different activities without really giving critical thought about what it is that we needed and could have benefited from when we were students. And so with Puente, and before Puente, as a professional, I always felt that I loved my students and I wanted to do the very best for them. But being a Puente practitioner taught me that it was okay to do so, that it was okay to love my student, to care about them and demonstrate that care for them. And why wouldn't we? We want to be able to show them that they matter to us. And the way that you do that is by connecting on all these different levels, not just the role of the professor or the counselor, but really in ways where you humanize yourself. And that's what Puente does. They work with a framework of pedagogy of cariño, which is really a way to love and show care for your students and everything that you do in counseling and in teaching and programming events that just don't happen inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom, right? So the thing about Puente is that they're very intentional about all of the practices that are put together to, again, have students embrace their culture that has been a lot of times been made invisible to the rest of the world. And so that's a way to be student-centered and equity-centered, is really to put the student as a person first. And so I'm sure that we'll talk more about it in a little bit, but I'm really happy to be here, and I'll turn it back over to Luis.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your experience, as well as your cariño. And just touching on that, I'm glad you brought that up, because Puente, of course, is known for that. And I think sometimes that's misunderstood. That doesn't mean, I don't think, that you're not also pushing for changes that need to happen, or to address students' needs. So how are you showing up with your Puente Cariño when it comes to any kind of changes or reform efforts in the case of guided pathways? If you are involved, or even if you're not directly involved, how are you also trying to help the institution change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, this can be a challenge in different ways, depending on the circumstances of your campus and where they're at with their institutional efforts as well. But some of the things that I do is try to go ahead and move forward on any committees or professional development in the same way that I approach my students, right? Trying to get to know people for who they are, not just their title and their role. trying to incorporate like community agreements or in ways that we connect with students that are fun. If you take a look at your shared governance, right, a lot of things happen in a certain way, and we have a tendency to have to feel like we have to move through an agenda or different practices and policies without really pausing to reflect about what it means and how it impacts people in those equity roles and the students most of all. So I think that's one of the things that I've gotten better at when I'm serving in different areas in my college, is to just kind of try to pause and have everybody pause to think about what it is that we're doing. And I think sometimes it's just as simple as that, because when it comes to guided pathways and other larger scale policy implementations, sometimes we tend to try to check off the boxes, right? Without really thinking about what does it mean to be an equity practitioner? What does it mean to embed that throughout our campus? And it's a really challenging process, and like we said earlier today, sometimes the strategy is to find your people, right? People who have similar mindsets as you, to help you try to figure that out for your campus, not for yourself, but really for your students, right? And yes, it's helpful for colleagues too, because we know that, once you're first gen for life. So we want to try to help that by just bringing in people to go ahead and share insights that is often missed a lot. And I can't say this enough, that equity and social justice can't be an afterthought when we're doing major changes like this that impact students so much.
Thank you again, Cynthia. Look forward to your joining the conversation at the end when we bring everyone back together. It's now my pleasure to have our wonderful Dr. Orante, who I have much respect for and great admiration for his many, many years of service to our communities around community colleges and beyond. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Orante. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Luis, you just aged me by saying many, many, and many years there. But I want to thank you, Luis, Valeria, Christina, and Lupe for the opportunity of being here today. As I introduce myself, I just wanted to kind of lift up a little bit of what Ms. Cordova had mentioned about being seen and heard. Our students are people first. And when she speaks to identity, because that's what I wanted to at least share with you too. My name is Nuan Orante. I'm the son of Conrado and Leticia Orante. I was born and raised in the Philippines, the northern part of the mountain regions of Baguio City. I'm a widower to an amazing queen, Anjanette Orante. May she rest in power. I'm a father to two amazing women, Malaya, her name means freedom, and Kaya means I can. I am an immigrant. I am a resident of Oakland for the last 20 years. I have an obligation to my community with a doctorate degree that I have been conferred by the CSU in the state of California. I have been an educator for the last 25 years. I have worked in almost all segments of our educational system. That includes elementary, middle school, high school, UC, CSU, private, and now the California Community College system. My heart, my home, because it is where the people are at. So I love community colleges and the work that we do. I have served as the director of EOP&S, the Dean of Student Support Services, and I also have served as the VPSS at Diablo Valley College. I see Yvonne, Canada is here, so nice to see you, Yvonne, and now serving as a VPSS at Skyline College. I took the time to introduce myself this way because I am more than my position. In my position, my ancestors, my community, and my varied experiences must inform who I am in my position and the work that I must do. Our students are people first, according to Ms. Cordova. The same is for our students. I always share that too. We must acknowledge them as their authentic self and genius that they already are. Again, my name is Dr. Nuan Orante. Luis, did you want to ask a question, or should I just go to that point?
No, just go to the point.
Okay. So the question I wanted to address is, how does institutions pivot to meet the needs of our students given the current circumstances? And I wanted to frame it in this way. I think when we offer hope And when our actions are predicated by love, we're able to critically transform lives, our community, and also our institutions. But we can't simply be in the abstract and theoretical in that, but hope, love, and transformation can actually be operationalized. The way I bring it to my work is that, again, as Cordova had indicated about identity, right, that we need to develop cultural relevant pedagogy in which it connects them to our folks, our students. It's about claiming and reclaiming space that is appropriate and relevant. I also believe that for our institutions, as we're pivoting, we also need to do research differently. We need to shift how we measure outcomes. Beyond the notion of statistical reliability and validity, we also must go beyond reporting outcomes the way we've always done it around retention, success certificate, degrees, and transfers. Instead, we develop the habit of distinguishing the purpose of doing research for reporting purposes and doing research to know our students and creating an identity of our students so we can then do appropriate and effective interventions. There's a conversation earlier about intersectionality. I think when I talk about research in this way, when we begin creating profiles of our students, it's important to be able to not just diversify or disaggregate, right? We can always look at sections like race, gender, and age. But I'm talking about how do we then begin conducting research that talks about a Black male age 18 to 14 who has received their financial aid the first 10 days of school or not, and what the implications of that condition potentially have on the student experience. That's the kind of intersectionality that I'm talking about, that we need to move how we do research so we can then intervene and make corrections that are appropriate. Also, when we're doing research, it's about interrogating and dismantling oppressive practices. And so in so doing, when we conduct research, even in the language that we use, how do we avoid to be race neutral and race evading in our language, right? We have to call it out, and we have to be able to be subjective and investing in that, and not necessarily just looking at the objectivity of how we conduct research and research for all. The last point that I wanted to bring is an equitable distribution of resources to realize equity. So distribution of resources is super critical, right? In addition to identity, in addition to changing the way we conduct research within our institutions, we also need to look at how resources are distributed within the institutions. And we all do this through our program review process. We need to know our worth, and we need to be able to claiming resources to be able to do the right work, because it's not about the equal distribution of resources from our conventional program reviews, but we need disproportionate or inequitable or disproportionate investment to realize equity, if that's making sense, right? So it's not about the equal distribution, but how do we invest our resources in the right way? That way we can then impact change within our organization. So again, I just wanted to summarize by indicating, if we wanted to, and our institutions are needing to pivot to meet the needs of our students, I believe that developing cultural relevant pedagogy and acknowledging the identity of our students, conducting appropriate and different ways of doing research, and the distribution of resources, which is all within our program review, is our best way of really bringing equity to our institution, and also changing some practices that had been conventionally in place that perpetuate the inequities that we see. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Dr. Arente. That was beautiful. I really appreciate your sharing your heart and also your mind. The analysis that you bring to this work is so important. Thank you to all of our speakers. And as we're looking through chat to see if there's any questions there, we did want to take a quick pause here and just ask the audience a question that I believe will be showing up on our screen, and ask you to respond in the chat. What is the most recent activity that you have done that has sharpened your equity lens? I heard earlier today on a webinar that was done on decentering whiteness, that there's been a lot of offering. As we all know, I've certainly, along with everyone, have been joining quite a bit of resource webinars, and not all of them necessarily are unmasking or untangling the issues, and some are. And so whatever you've availed yourself of, what have you done with some of the learning to apply it? And so if you could share in the chat, that would be wonderful. We'll give it a minute or two here to see what wonderful examples we can get from our audience, and then we'll move into our Q&A. I feel like we have to play the Jeopardy music in the background or something. If you prefer, you want to raise your hand, we'll have you unmute and ask, or share your example if you wish. Anyone willing to do that? I don't see hands up.
I can do that if
Oh,
you'd
wonderful.
Like.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I didn't raise my hand. This is
Okay.
Carmen. I'm from Pasadena City College. So I was typing in the chat, and I think this is simple. I'm not really even sure if it counts, but I've just been doing something that is, I'm hoping, inclusive. And every announcement that I post during my Canvas page, my weekly announcements, I will wish them happy holidays that I don't personally celebrate. We had the Yom Kippur, we had Rosh Hashanah, we have the Mid-Autumn Festival, just to remind them that, hey, I know about it, and I hope you have a great holiday and that you celebrate it. And it's funny because one student replied to that announcement and said, well, I don't celebrate it, but thanks. I said, well, I don't either, but someone does. So that's just a small thing I do. And also working with the social justice group that I'm a co-chair of in our division. So really trying to be there for my students. I hope that counts, but that's just something small I thought of.
Yes, it counts. And thank you for sharing that, because and sometimes as professionals and practitioners, we're looking for the big, huge idea. But really, when it comes to working with students, it's the small, direct, quick things that we do that really impact the most. And I could only imagine that your student that said that to you, that I don't thank you, but I don't celebrate it, but thank you for sharing that. Really, I'm sure that impacted them. And you think about the students that didn't say that, I'm sure also felt like they were being welcomed, and that you're creating this welcoming environment. Any comment from our panel about that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Luis, we have one hand up.
Oh yeah, who is that?
I'm probably going to pronounce your name wrong, so I apologize to hear
Hi,
it.
it's fine.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I want to say what I've done actually recently was joined in on one of our district committees or subcommittees for our program review. And I felt like in order for me to actually understand like where we're not doing, I need to see where we are, because, being a counselor, we work in silos. And we only work with the student, but kind of understanding our institution of how it actually operates has been very big. And, I saw that through the work that I've done with our guided pathways efforts, that it's necessary, but to actually see and hear the conversations and be the input, because I went and represented our Latino faculty and staff. And so when I went there, I had an idea of what our students needed, but to go and actually hear how it's being done was definitely necessary. So bringing back the information and flowing and working collaboratively has been something that I'm intentional about this year.
Thank you so much. And I believe you said Thai would be okay to use.
Yes, I'm
Yes,
going to change that.
That's okay. No, I appreciate that. We did have one in the chat from Veronica, who said adding preferred pronouns in all of my written correspondence, including Zoom. Thank you for that reminder. It really is helpful, because we should all think about that as we're trying to be inclusive. And so I appreciate that reminder. We also have a hand up from Robert. Robert, do you want to unmute and say quickly your activity?
Yeah,
or what?
I have a question. I guess it's for the panel or anybody else. Given the workload that counselors have, the demand on them on a daily basis, how do they able to maneuver their workload and seeing students, and also get involved in shared governance on different committees and projects, not only on campus, but perhaps in the district, but more specifically on campus. How does that work?
Thank you, Robert. We'll move into the Q&A, so you did that beautifully. So panel, would anyone like to respond to that question?
I'll respond. So I've been thrusted into a lot of different positions on campus now. I am the chair of our Integrated Student Success Committee. I'm also a senator and part of a Guided Pathways work group. And so literally, and I'm a new counselor, I should say that, right? Like I was hired last January now. And so right at the, at COVID, I was online for most of my counseling. And so I would say to your question, finding, it's weird, right? Because you got to do the work at all three levels, and you got to be there at all three levels. When I say the three levels, you need to be student facing, right? We have one-on-one meetings with our students. Also, just in the mix of our profession is so difficult and so technical. CSUs are always changing, right? So our students are, so we got to be on top of that. And then at the institutional level, what affects our students? And I would say, just my answer is, there is no answer. You just got to do it, right? And figure it out as you're going along. Because I've been working with a lot of my colleagues trying to figure out what's the best mix, right? And how to, even my tenure team, I'm going through tenure while I'm doing all of this. And the literal question I ask them all the time, am I doing too much? And they say, you're doing enough to move the college in the right way. So I just say, having a team of folks that you're checking in with, making sure that you're always, ensuring that they see you from the outside looking in, right? And so they might see where you're not being healthy, boundaries, that kind of stuff. So I would say always having a team, and then always knowing that this work is our work, right? So I don't know if there's a way to balance it. I think we just got to dive in, and then when we come out in the, at the end of spring semester, kind of reevaluate how things went in that academic year.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Byron. Yeah, it's also referred to as, in some views, getting into good trouble and doing the work. So thank you for that, Robert. Thank you for the question, Robert. Thank you for the response, Byron. Anyone else from our panel, Dr. Arente or Cynthia, would you like to also add your response? And then we'll go to another question.
I'll yield to Cynthia if she has anything else to share.
I'm okay. I think we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, good. Let me ask our team if there's another question in the chat that we could go to, or I have a question here. I just want to make sure that our audience gets time to ask questions. If not, I can ask the next question. I'm not hearing any one.
That works. Sorry about that. I think our audience is marinating on questions.
Okay, let me ask this next question of our panel, because again, the framing of the series has to do with the pandemic, lessons from the pandemic, equity lens, social justice, these learning communities. So from that perspective, building on the lessons that you've learned or you're going through as we're all going through this amazing experience with the pandemic and otherwise, what do you do differently now? We thought we were going to be able to come back, and then we had to pivot back. What are you learning about readjusting as you go to the moment and to the service of students? Yeah, Dr. Arente?
I was just going to share, I think it's also important when we're considering that, is we also need to consider the trauma and experiences that our colleagues have gone through, right? Because we're asking them to come back and then to begin to offer services. So that should not be absent of our intentions when we're beginning to continue serving our students. And then when we begin thinking about our students, one thing I just wanted to share also is, I think we know the immediate impact of the pandemic in terms of our classes and students not enrolling. One of the things that we're having a conversation now at Skyline that I'm asking even our counselors to help us kind of frame the dialogue around this is what might be the implications 2 years out, right? Because there are foundational courses that many of our students might not be receiving, and we don't even know what the impact that might be until 2 years when they're taking then the sequence course to the next level. And the impact there is if they're not doing well on student services, financial aid eligibility, academic probation, and then my worry is that there might be a disproportionately impacted student population that are already having a difficult time that will continue to be affected by that. And so that's another consideration is how do we look beyond and not just the immediacy of what the pandemic has done to the experiences of our students.
I can share as well. Yeah, I think, the pandemic, both COVID and for racial justice, this last, almost 2 years, it's, I think one of the things we have to realize is that a lot of these struggles and challenges aren't new. It's just that all of a sudden that they're very visible and they're magnified. And so I think that's something very important to acknowledge, because it's only because now we get to communicate with students in different ways and we get to see where their living circumstances in some situations that now we know some of the things that they have already been going through, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic and everything that's been happening. And I think here in, particularly in the San Diego County region, the Latino community was hit very hard with disproportionate impact, right? So it's just a reflection of what happens in education and society as a whole. And I think one of the things that we had to learn to do quickly is to be flexible with students, right? So why isn't it okay for them to come on their phone or like share your screen in a way that they can see it, right? Or try to get information for them to be able to get resources, being flexible about, hey, my connection got lost when I was doing the quiz. Can I take it over? Sure. Like there's sometimes assumptions based on race, but also just on students of assumed criminality that somebody's trying to get away with something, right? But most of the time that's not the case. They really do need help. And sometimes if a student's reaching out to you, believe them, ask what they need, because just that one step takes a lot for a student to be able to do. But it also says a lot about the kind of space that you create and the being approachable to the students, really. And so, some things that were definitely magnified is for students that they either contracted COVID or they had a family member that got COVID and they were hospitalized or struggling to get an appointment for a vaccination if they could do it. And we also have to realize that a lot of our students are also essential workers. So sometimes they lost their jobs, their main source of incomes, and they have families that are relying on them. We also had students that didn't have the luxury to be able to not go to work. And so we have to be accommodating and realizing that maybe it is okay for your students to join on your Zoom counseling session or your class, depending if you're teaching it synchronously from their job, and that happens, or with their child in their lap, or breastfeeding, or they have to go ahead and change a diaper. These are all things that really happened, and we have to again acknowledge that they were already existing, these challenges. It's not anything new. And there was an article written by a team of, I think it was CEOs from community colleges that really highlighted all the great things that we did really rapidly. But I posed the question, again, like, why did it take that to all of a sudden be resourceful and adapt? And it would be a real shame if we really didn't learn anything from the pandemic that our students went through, particularly our students of color, and did the same thing. There is no going back to normal. There's you knowing what the reality is of students as they live them every day. So I do hope that we all engage in taking responsibility for what we can do differently for our students. And again, just showing that we care about them. And when it comes to racial justice, it's, we have to be really mindful that, students are more willing to talk about experiences, but a lot of times they're also now having flashbacks to experiences that they face with racism or discrimination that happened when they were little, when they were younger. and they're now just really thinking deeply about them and reflecting about what that means. And it's our role as educators in our capacities to help students facilitate that process in a way that can be healing, restorative, and really empowering for the students. And really, we have to be able to acknowledge those different things that our students are going through and not try to go back to status quo, because that's what has been hurting our students.
Thank you so much for that. Comprehensive also with so many other pieces that have been talked about already. We have just one last question. I want to do a quick rapid fire if you all can just contribute one idea or one response. This is a question from Linda. How have you drawn on the work of learning communities on your campus to help students continue their studies and make progress towards their goals throughout the pandemic? Specifically, what can other campuses learn from that? And anybody want to start?
I'll start. Great question. With the Emoji practices, I think the number one goal of the practices is that we humanize our students. And I would say if faculty in an institution can humanize students, much of what my colleagues have been talking about most of this session, then we start to move towards more equitable outcomes. We start to move to an institution that's grounded and founded in equity, right? I know I got to be quick, so I'll leave it at that and let my colleagues take on.
No, thank you, Brian. Dr. Arente or Cynthia, any comment?
I just wanted to expound on a point that Byron had made about humanizing students. I also wanted to share, again, from the point of view of the institution, is that we also need to be practicing humanizing institutional kind of behaviors, right? So like I mentioned about resource allocation earlier, and the reality that we're facing also is the HERF distribution of resources to students. And Cynthia talked about, again, the position of distrust and what students are going to use the funds for and everything else, when it's really not for us to begin judging, right? But then to just really get the services and support there. So if we actually take that position of humanizing students and humanizing our practices as an organization, I think it can go a long way.
Thank you. We're running out of time. Cynthia, anything real quick?
Yeah, as far as expanding these types of practices on a more general level, I think it's just being really practical too. One of them is having discussions with other faculty, staff, people on campus about what are some things that are working and not working for you in your class or counseling sessions, and creating space for students, right? Not a way where we're going ahead and taking over for them. It's something like really simple. Could be how do you discuss engagement? And we know that we need that for students to be able to create a support system for themselves to move forward. A quick example is I think a lot of people are afraid of enabling the private chat, right? Don't be scared of it. It's fine, because that's a way for students to connect to each other and build support. That private chat is not about you, it's about the students. And also just another practical strategy, providing a platform to have a social media chat so they can go ahead and talk about themselves with each other and any support that they might need as well.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. Want to thank our panel. Thank you. This was wonderful sharing. I want to quickly share a couple of things. Our Basecamp community of practice is still going strong. Please join us if you'd like counseling, student services professionals. Please check out the link, I believe, in your chat. And we also, it was wonderful this last round of sharing. We talked so much about humanizing. Our next panel or next webinar will be focused on meeting human needs, exercising equity in student support services. That's on October 13th. We hope you will join us. Stay safe until then. We do have a short evaluation. I believe it's just 3 questions. Please join the link there and respond at your leisure. I believe it'll be open all day, at least, so that you could give us your feedback. We need that in order to improve and to make changes to our webinar series. I want to again thank you all for sharing. We hope you, oh, look, we have our Wordle. So this is the first question that pops up on the Mentimeter. You all are wonderful to share. Thank you. And we do hope that you will continue coming back to the next series. Again, thank you to our panel, Dr. Nuan Orante, Cynthia Cordova, and Byron Reeves. Thank you so much for taking your lunch hour, joining with us, as well as the audience for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it and learned and got full of nourishing thoughts and ideas and wisdom from our wonderful panel. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to leave it